Apple has finally announced the long-awaited Apple Silicon Macs. But were they worth the wait? Stick around. Hey everyone, welcome back to Today in Tech. I'm Julia Beauchamp, joined as always by Computer World Executive Editor Ken Mingus, as well as Macworld Senior Writer Michael Simon. I'm in a new location. We're moving. Please bear with us while we've got this temporary space. I'll try to spruce up the walls in the meantime. But back to the most important topic at hand. Ken, were the Apple Silicon Macs worth the wait for you?
I think they were. And in fact, I'm waiting right now for my new 13-inch MacBook Pro with 16 gigs of RAM to ship from China. I'm at the...
Shocking. We're all shocked, Ken.
I know. Well, I mean, now, I should explain. Currently, I have a very good computer. It's a 2019 MacBook Pro, the 16-inch model. And it's going to be a bit of a shift going to a smaller screen. But I really did want to see what the M1 can do. I mean, just based on the early... benchmark scores that seem to be popping up now, probably from other reviewers who are running them through their tests. It looks like it's really a screamer, and I kind of want to test that out. I would certainly have gotten a 16-inch MacBook Pro with an M1 if they had it, but I guess we're going to have to wait on that. So for me, the wait was worth it, and now I'm waiting, and I'm going to have to wait for another couple of weeks.
So are you saying you're going to buy another MacBook in 6 months when the 16-inch comes out?
Well, it depends on if I can trade in something. At some point, these things are going to stack up, so I've got to find buyers. But I would consider it. It really depends on how portable I find the 13 inches. I go from my office to my couch and back to my office and back to my couch. So, portability is key. No, it really will depend on how much I get used to a smaller screen. I've used 13s before. Given the hardware for the screen and everything, I should be fine. I may find it a little constricting, but to me, it's worth it.
Do you hook it up to a monitor?
I don't.
You don't?
No.
I have a 13-inch. I've had one this is my work model. I didn't buy it, but I love the portability, the lightness, and all that stuff. But I do have it hooked up to an external monitor when I'm at my desk because it's pretty cramped when I'm trying to do writing and Safari or something, and I'm constantly going back and forth between windows. So something to consider. You can these new ones are capable of driving that $6,000 Pro XDR display. You can grab one of those.
I think it is a time of austerity, and there's only so many things the boss will let me buy. But it's interesting though when we talk about the monitors. That's been one of the complaints is that apparently this will only drive one monitor. And, for something that's theoretically a Pro, there's been a lot of back and forth online between the Pro model and the MacBook Air with the M1 as well as to which one's really the better deal.
Well, that's the $1 million question, and we won't know until we test them. I have it under good authority that Macworld will have testing maybe tomorrow, definitely early next week. So we'll know the difference between the Air and the Pro, and it's interesting. So Apple launched 3 computers on Tuesday: the MacBook Air, the 13-inch MacBook Pro, and the Mac Mini, all of which are kind of in the same class, so to speak. The 13-inch Pro that it replaces, it was faster than the Air, relatively significantly so. But there's a higher model that's the real Pro, and that hasn't been replaced. In fact, they're still selling the Intel version of that, which costs $1,800, and that's the 2 gig Core i7, I think it is, and that's what I always thought of as where the Pro starts. So yeah, you could get a 13-inch Pro for $1,299, and you still can, but it's Apple positions it in a certain way. It has two Thunderbolt ports for one, which is a big difference in my mind. Like there's 2 on the left side and there's nothing on the right side. If you're a Pro, you have I have 4 of them in there right now. I have power, I have a drive, I have a display, and I have a USB hub for other peripheral devices. So you're going to need that, and those higher models have them. Your 16-inch has 4.
Correct.
As does the higher end 13-inch Pro. So the way I look at this release, and this is why I didn't buy one yet, as much as I really want one,
Tell me why. Wait. Even
Yeah.
before you, why would you want one even though you're holding off?
Because this is what I've been waiting for. I've literally written about this numerous times. I have been waiting for Apple to just blow the doors off the Mac. They've been somewhat constrained over the course of the last, we'll say 3 to 4 years. You know, when they switched to Intel in 05, the transition was, you know, it was okay. Speeds are what they are, and here's a couple of slight tweaks to the design and things like this. But a couple years later, the MacBook Air came out, and we saw like why they needed to change, because Intel had better heat disposition, whatever that word is.
Dispersion.
They had dispersion. That's the one.
Yeah.
They had better power efficiency. They, you know, so Apple was able to take the PowerBooks and the iBooks of old and really transform them into these new devices. We have the Touch Bar, things like that. Better battery life, certainly better speeds, and Intel allowed that in the immediacy of the transition. Once we hit like 2000 and like around when the iPhone came out, say 2007, 2010. Well, no, we'll go like 2012. We'll say
I'd go a little more recent than that.
Like
2012.
Mid iPhone, like
Yeah.
you know, iPhone 4 or 5. That's when Intel really started to slow down. They stopped hitting their benchmarks on the chip itself, so they're still stuck on, I think it's a 10 nanometer process or 11 that they're using. So, you know, just a quick little Reader's Digest: the smaller the chip, the smaller the die process, the more power efficient and the more transistors and the just the whole thing works and operates better. And Intel hasn't really changed their fab process in a long time, and they've tried and they've hit roadblocks, and Apple has. Apple's iPhone 12 is on a 5 nanometer process. It's the only chip in the world on that scale that is that small and that efficient and that fast. And Apple's been waiting now for Intel to deliver something, maybe not 5 nanometers, but something 7 nanometers, maybe 9.
Anything, you know,
Yeah.
something that shows progress.
Something that's a massive leap. So Intel's generations, they're iterations. They're not massive leaps. And Apple has wanted to do a massive leap both in terms of speed, battery life, and innovation in the Mac. And they've been criticized because they haven't. And a lot of that is because of the chip. Now, I'm not blaming Intel completely, because Apple, I think, at some point said, "Oh, you know what? Forget this. We're going to work on this." So they've been working on this for, you know, probably 5 years, and they basically said, "Listen, we'll upgrade the Macs with what we can do. We're not going to blow anything out here. We're not going to do anything super innovative because we have something coming." So this new chip.
The system on chip is just
The system on
in terms
chip
of what
is-
they built.
It's insane.
It's crazy. It's
insane.
crazy. The unified memory,
Yeah.
all of the controllers that are built in. I mean, that's what I want to see in action.
Yeah, and you got the ISP from the iPhone, the image signal processor from the iPhone. So even though they didn't upgrade the camera, which I don't know why,
I
the
know.
pictures will be better. As you say, the unified memory. So it only goes up to 16 gigs now, but that'll, you know, those limitations will increase as we get to higher models. The speeds, we haven't got any like real in-depth analysis yet. We're basing this on Geekbench scores that have kind of been floating around the net, and I mean, it's absurd. The speeds are absurd. They're almost as fast as like Intel's top of the line desktop processors. They're ridiculous. And
Well, not only that, you mentioned before the battery life.
battery life
I
is
remember
17
correctly,
to 20 hours. Yeah.
20 hours on the MacBook Pro, and I think 18 on the MacBook Air.
Something like 15 to 18,
is it
I think,
15?
depending on what you're doing. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah,
But
and I mean,
those are almost 75% better than before. And Apple usually is very conservative with its battery estimates, so you're going to get that, possibly more. Now, I want all that, and I was ready to buy one. I haven't bought a Mac in a long time, and I use Chromebooks and I use my work machine, and I've been waiting for something like this
yeah.
to spend.
So why did you wait? Why are you holding off?
But because I think that in 6 months or 8 months, there's going to be a new 13-inch or 14-inch is also rumored Pro model that's going to make me regret the purchase that I make this week. I think it'll have.
Ouch.
Well,
It hasn't even gotten here yet, and it's
well,
already
this
outdated.
Because what I need and what I want is different than what Apple delivered today. I would never buy an Air previously. I want something higher than that. I would buy a 13-inch Pro, but not the model they came out with. I want that $1,800 one. I want 32 gigs of RAM. I want 4 Thunderbolt ports, and I want the M2 or the M1X or whatever they're going to do to create a pretty decent gulf between the MacBook Air and the MacBook Pro.
Yeah, I totally agree. This is like a transitional device. This is, really 1 foot, at least in terms of form factor, 1 foot in the old world, and then with the under the hood system on chip and everything, 1 foot in the new world. And
it makes perfect sense that they did that. I'm not criticizing them at all. These models are smart, and the way they did it is smart too. Like if you came out with the chip and a massive redesign, people aren't focusing on what they're supposed to be focusing on. Mm-hmm. Apple delivered speed, performance, and battery life, which is what we are looking for right now. In 6 months to a year, when everything else starts rolling out, then that's where we're going to start to see like what Apple can really do with these chips. But from the starting gate, it's insane. We have never seen a leap like this in a PC ever anywhere. It just doesn't happen. Not from one generation to the next.
Definitely a shot across the bow to the other chip makers, including Intel. I mean, there was a lot of discussion online about whether, the rival companies would like stick their heads in the dirt and pretend that Apple's not making this big leap, but they're going to have to pay attention to it. Let me ask you, one of the big limitations, if you will, or certainly one of the things that's interesting is that there are only 2 options: 8 gigs of RAM or 16 gigs of RAM.
I mean,
I got a 16
gig. To be
gig,
fair, that's what it was before with these models. The 32 gig is on the higher model. It's the 16 Pro, and the 13, the 2 gigahertz Core i7 13-inch. So, it does seem like they went backwards, but they really didn't. They just didn't upgrade the whole line, and that's where my frustrations are a little bit. Had they come out with a 13-inch Pro and then a 13-inch Pro, the step-up models,
Pro Max,
I would have bought that. Right. Whatever. They never did differentiate. It was just with price. I would assume there's a new version of the chip. So with the iPhone and iPad, they have the A14 or they don't yet. They had the A12, and then they came out with the A12Z, which was a little bit more performance for the iPad Pro. I assume they're going to do something similar. They'll have the M1 in these, and then the M1X or Z or whatever they call it. That gives you a little bit more something. Apple isn't saying anything about anything, so we don't know clock speed. We don't know a boost and cache and all that stuff. It's just like, here's the chip. I assume there's a difference between the current Air and the Pro, because one has a fan and one doesn't. Mm-hmm. So the 13-inch Pro that you got has to have at least a sustained performance boost that the Air isn't going to get.
I'm assuming it's got a higher max that it can go at a sustained level for a longer period of time because it's got the fan.
Yeah, and right, that makes sense. But Apple didn't mention that. It's weird. I didn't expect them to say this is a 3.2 gig whatever, because they don't do that. But I did expect them to somewhat differentiate them, at least for the layman, to walk into a store and say, okay, now I'm getting this, I'm getting that. If you compare the Air and the Pro, just on Apple's website, the difference is like the Touch Bar.
Touch Bar, which I'm not particularly on Team Touch Bar. I don't really care. It doesn't bother me. No, it's okay.
It used to, but I'm fine with it now.
But you're right. You're looking at that. You're looking at fan versus no fan, and you're looking at a slight difference in screen brightness. 500 nits on the Pro, 400 on the Air.
Both of those are way too bright for people to look at more than a couple.
I like bright. Bright is good. If you're outside though in sunlight.
Mine's always on all right, fine. In that instance, yes. But usually you keep it at about 60% brightness. No one. Well, maybe you are, but I don't put mine.
I've got old eyes. I need brightness. I like brightness. But to your larger point though, even though we don't know about the M1X, M2, M3, whatever, this opens up a long runway.
It's very exciting
of advances over the next few years, both in terms of the processor and the system on chip, and just design. I mean, there will be many things that Apple can do with design now that I think they might have been constrained
Agreed.
because they had the Intel chips, they had to build in fans and keep them, thermally limited in some ways.
Yeah,
It's going to be a really
a,
interesting few years.
So someone made a GIF. I think it's from Apple's website. Maybe it was a picture they took of the Mac Mini. So you can take off that bottom piece, and there's just like a ton of space in it now because they don't need all all those thermal elements that they needed before to keep these chips cool. I mean, the fact that the MacBook Air is running at the speeds that we assume it is, and doesn't have a fan is just mind-boggling.
Do we have any idea, in terms of unified, the unified memory, unified RAM, sort of feeding both, the system, the operating system, the graphics, everything, how that's going to work, or whether that, I mean, it seems to be a good thing because you're basically, you're putting everything closer to the RAM, so, things should be faster. But do we know yet how that's?
I mean, we don't. That's another one where they haven't really. We know it's DDR4.
Right.
But we don't know what speeds it's running at. We don't know how it's working with the chip, and we just know that it's all somehow packed onto this little tiny. I think they said 16 billion transistors on the chip or some craziness.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just from a strictly engineering standpoint. I don't care what OS flag you fly. You have to just stand back and say, "Wow, that's just damn impressive."
Well, that's ultimately, Juliet, back to your original question, like, why would I go ahead with something that, as we've already discussed, really is sort of a transitional model, even though it's got the latest chip. It's like, I do have an appreciation for the engineering that has gone into this, and I kind of just want to see it in action. Even if this is not a laptop that I would necessarily keep for 3 or 4 years, who knows? It might be. It's not a given that I'll necessarily do something in a few months, depending on what Apple does. But it's a glimpse of where Apple is going. So it's a glimpse of the future that I can use now. So that's sort of my rationale to myself anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily steer anybody away from buying one. I mean, there's a lot to like here. It's very impressive what they did. And, there are questions like, how do all of the old apps run? How fast? There's some reports that say it's about, so native apps are blazingly fast. Apple's apps and whatever's been updated for Big Sur and for the Silicon. They're saying that the emulation, which is Rosetta 2, which will run all your old apps from your current system, is about 50% of those speeds, which sounds awful, but honestly, that's probably faster than you're getting now. I was just going to say,
50% of supersonic right. is still pretty damn quick,
So I mean, you're still getting a faster machine, even if you're running things in emulation. And I think it's going to be very quick. 3 months, maybe. And most of the apps that we want, Photoshop, things like that, will be running natively on Apple Silicon. I mean, some of the more intensive ones, like maybe Pixelmator and Premiere, things like that, might take a little bit longer. But Apple's apps, there's already Final Cut is obviously optimized, as is Logic. So, they say that it's not as, when I say they, I mean developers say that there's some work to be done, but it's not nearly as labor intensive as the last transition with the tools that Apple has provided. So I don't think it's going to take years. I think it'll take middle of next year. No. I think that
6 months, 9 months,
90% of the apps that we want will be there. Yeah. And now we can run iOS apps as well. So you're going to log into the App Store on Big Sur with your new machine and see a whole sidebar of iPhone apps and iPad apps. Now, I don't know how all that's going to look or work, and there'll be some hurdles there. But you just opened up your Mac to, like, I don't know, a couple 100,000 really good, really useful utilities that weren't available before.
It's also interesting too, and this goes back to a discussion we've had off and on leading up to this in terms of pricing. Because, this is the sort of thing where Apple could have, bumped up prices a couple of $100. You're getting the latest, greatest. And it didn't. In fact, wasn't one of the devices $100 cheaper? Am I misremembering?
The Mini is $100 cheaper.
I mean, so they could have taken advantage of this to try to gouge a little bit. And as best I can tell, I don't think they have.
Yeah, I mean, everybody wants a price decrease. But for what we see about that MacBook Air 999 looks pretty damn good. And this also, so the machine that we have now, a year from now, let's say there's a MacBook Air with the M2 for 999. Apple could sell this one for 799. Because they do that with the iPhones. If you buy an iPhone 11 right now, it's really still one of the best phones out there. And if you don't necessarily need the speed and the improvements, the camera improvements, whatever the MacBook Air brings, let's say it brings a new Face ID system or something like that. If you don't need or want that stuff, you'll probably be able to get still one of the best Macs out there for $800, assuming Apple follows that thing. And they've never really done that before, because it's not really, with the when you're buying the chips, the savings aren't there like they are now. So Apple can do a lot with pricing, a lot with innovation, a lot with with just the roadmap that they have now by controlling this whole thing, and the OS is just like the sky's the limit here.
I definitely think, sort of as we look back now over the 3 events that Apple's had this year, this was the biggest. I think in terms of what it means for the company's future, what it means for software, hardware, all of it. It's just it's a big one. And one more thing, it was a big one.
Yeah, I agree. It's not going to be the biggest in terms of sales. That's the iPhone, and it won't even be the biggest in terms of influence, probably, because the Apple Watch is there too. But like 3-4 years from now, we're going to look back on this as a watershed moment where Apple really, where all these things start to converge and it starts to separate itself even more from the pack. Before Tuesday, the MacBook Air was absolutely comparable to anything, Hewlett Packard, Dell. They use the same chips. They were very similar. So people can walk into a store and say, I can get a $999 Air or a $599 Dell, and they're about the same speed and they do about the same stuff. And now I'm getting an extra port on the Dell. That's not the case anymore. Now you're getting a $999 Air that performs like a $1,700 Dell, maybe even more. So, Apple sold $9 billion worth of Macs last year, so people are noticing and they're buying them. And I think that this is really we're gonna look back and say, wow, Apple really just finally became one of the industry leaders and isn't just like a niche player anymore.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah. It's an inflection point.
You're going to buy like 100 of them.
No, I'm not.
Between now and then.
I'm good. No, I'm good with my one little 13-inch for a while.
Perfect. So it seems like worth the wait. Mike, you're going to wait a little bit more. But importantly, it's not like Apple's really ever going to go back from this. Now that they're doing their own chips, they have their M1 processors, it's not like they're ever really going to be returning to an Intel.
Yeah, this is it. There's no more transition. Yeah, this is the last one. They're still selling Intel. I don't expect to see any new Intel Macs ever, but they will sell the old ones as long as people need them and want them, probably until into 2022, I would think, particularly with the Mac Pro. But once they all change over, that's it. And Apple's not really a huge client of Intel. They based on the hierarchy of PC makers. But if I was Intel, I would be very, very concerned right now, and to a lesser extent AMD as well, because Apple is really they really made a quantum leap here in several areas, and they're just getting started.
Agreed.
All right. Well, thank you both so much, as always, for joining me. You guys have lots of great insights, and I will be linking all of the applicable articles from Macworld and Computer World in the description. Check out some of Mike's pieces. You can see why, if you really want the nitty-gritty of why he's waiting. I'll link his most recent article down below. And thank you all so much for watching this episode of Today in Tech. If you liked this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel. Hit the bell icon in the corner so you're notified every single time we post a new video. Are you going to be jumping onto the bandwagon, getting this new Apple Silicon Mac with the M1 processors, or are you going to be waiting a little bit? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.